Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Honolulu Museum of Art's Doris Duke Theater. My name is Sarah. I'm the theater manager and programmer here. Thank you all so much for joining us for the 14th annual Honolulu Surf Film Festival. And of course, for today's screening, we're really excited to be screening Wade in the Water, a wonderful documentary by director David Mesfin, who's in the house back there. Today's screening is also dedicated to one of Hawaii's most celebrated black surfers, Montgomery Button's Kaluhio Kalani. His family's also here in the house. Thank you guys for being here. And really, today is going to be a celebration of black surfing and aquatic culture, and I hope you guys really enjoy. We'll be screening a short right beforehand called A New Wave, which is a short documentary about Michael February, who's a black surfer from South Africa, and the relationship he has with the water and with his father. It's really sweet. But before we get into the film, I have a few trivia questions, courtesy of the Surf Trivia Guy. So if you can answer these questions, you get Hawaii's own surf coin. So let's see if anyone knows, and this is pertinent to today's screening. Who is California's first black surfer? Yes, right there.
Is it Nick Gapaldon?
Yes, it is. Right. Thank you. Okay, and now, can you name kind of the only, sadly, black surf commentator? Yes, Sal Masakela. There you are. Thank you. So, like I said, please do stick around after the film. We're going to have a panel discussion with the director, David Mesfin, producer, Beyin Abraha, and moderated by Dr. Ethan Caldwell. So do stick around for that. Please join me in welcoming to say a few words about his father, Mario Kahulio Kalani.
How's it, guys? Thank you for coming out. I hope you enjoyed the film. David and Beyin, thank you guys so much for that. It's an amazing story, and yeah, thanks so much. So obviously, coming full force, my family here, the Kaluhio Kalanis. Stoked to be here. Yeah, I guess coming from Hawaii, my dad was a big influence on the surf community, and being the Hawaiian and black person that he grew up with the same kind of tribulations that we've seen in this film. And I think what's most important that we've all kind of taken away from his life and his story is that he moved through these trials and tribulations with such a big heart and the aloha spirit. And it's just shown from all the stories that I've heard from pretty much everyone I meet all around the world. Someone has something good to say about my dad, and it's super special. And yeah, kind of just plays into the whole field of how black surfers belong in the community and how Hawaiians belong in the community as well. Yeah. And yeah, I think it's important. And this movie definitely did a great job of portraying that, and thank you again for that. Yeah, mahalo for coming, guys.
Thank you again, Mario, for saying those wonderful words. And so now, please join me in welcoming to talk more about this film and the topics in it. We have director David Mesfin, producer Beyin Abraha, and our moderator Ethan Caldwell. Please come up to the stage. Thank you.
Hi everyone. Is this on? Okay, cool. Hi, how's it, folks? Thank you so much for coming out. David, for being here. And what we're gonna do is just, talk a little bit about the film, about the scene, as well when it comes to racing. I mean, not racing, surfing, race, Black folks in the scene, but then also, what becomes so important to take away from this documentary? Why is it so important to not only think about it here, but also globally? And, what are those sort of ramifications? So we'll talk a little bit here. I feel hella weird just being in the middle right now, so I'm just gonna let you know. And then we'll also get some questions. Yeah, let's switch real quick. Yeah, that way I can direct it this way. Cool. And so just to get started, a few questions for y'all. We'll open it back out to the audience. What's y'all's entry point into this? What got you into wanting to do a film about surfing? And what's your connection to the water as well?
Yeah, sure. I guess, before I start talking about the entry to the ocean, I do want to say thank you to Button's family for being here and welcoming us to Hawaii. I do want to also say thank you, I can't talk today. Say thank you to the museum for inviting us, our guest, you, for coming out and learning the history of Black surfing as you saw it, as we captured it, as we met these interesting people through our journey post-COVID. It took us 1.5 years to create this film, just a little bit of context of what it took to put this together. So in terms of origin, I'm originally from Ethiopia, landlocked nation. Thank you. I was adopted at a very young age and brought to St. Augustine, Florida, of all places. That's why you see the context of St. Augustine, Florida. And when I arrived, I didn't speak a lick of English. I didn't know how to swim. I didn't know anything about surfing. It was all new to me. I learned it. But contextually, being from Ethiopia, I was kind of shocked about the history, the Black history, the Black experience, given that I was from Ethiopia, an independent nation, never colonized. Just putting that in context to what was happening in St. Augustine was quite shocking to me. So I think it stayed in my DNA and became part of the subconscious story that always stayed behind me until I decided to tell this story through the lens of surfing. And going back to the story of surfing is because I did find surfing, it did have a healing quality to it. Like when I started surfing, I came to America by myself, so I needed to connect to something, to nature, and ocean became sort of like a place of healing. So coming back to this narrative, this story, it was during Black Lives Matter that I felt like I needed to heal. And the only way I could do it was through telling this story and my experience as a Black man in America. So took the time to put it together. The funny thing is, when I began this story, I was here in Hawaii on vacation. Bishop Museum, I spent time there. The first post on Wade in the Water Facebook page, or Instagram I should say, is actually Duke's longboard behind me. So the journey became here, back to the heritage of surfing, the respect of Ohana and Hawaiian culture. And in many ways, I wanted to invite the family of Buttons because when I began surfing, I only saw white kids surfing. And it was by accident, someone brought a VHS back then. And I saw this Black guy with fro surfing. It was the first time connecting with a Black person that surfed, that looked like me. And it had so much impact in me that inspired me to continue to surf because I knew there were other Black people who could surf as well. So that has stayed in my DNA as well. And it was important to me to tell his story and get the respect of the family and the acknowledgement of who he was and what he's done for the story. And I hope this documentary will inspire the next generation of Black surfers. Hopefully that answered your question.
No, absolutely.
I'll pass it on to my brother, Beyin.
Yeah, thank you, David. So the question was about origins when it comes to surfing and this film.
For you.
Yeah, totally for me. So for me, I grew up in Toronto, so similar to David, not really any kind of surfing opportunities. And I kind of talk about this now with my friends. I didn't even think about the idea of surfing. I don't remember ever seeing a picture of a surfer at all until about 5-6 years ago. I came to the Bay Area, and I had kind of a roommate that's used to surf. My co-intern lived in a van, he surfed. And then I got really interested in this concept of, while I'm in California, I might as well kind of try this thing. And then one day we went out, about like 10 of us, and really long boards, big waves. It wasn't like an amazing first time experience, but definitely connected with the sport and definitely the potential of what I could do in that sport. And then from there, I think I went one more time, and I finally caught a wave and finally felt that feeling of what it means to surf. And then quickly after that, I bought a board, I bought a wetsuit. I was waking up at 4 a.m. to go surf Santa Cruz like before work, like 4 or 5 times a week. And so it really kind of captured me. And then eventually I moved to LA for full-time kind of employment. And then I met David, and I got really involved in kind of the surfing community in LA. And David reached out to me to kind of feature me as part of this documentary and my organization that I was working with. And that was a crazy moment for me to see like some documentarian wants to feature my kind of story in some film. And I was like, wow, that's crazy. But I just thought it was such an amazing project. And so I wanted to just get more and more involved. And I told him, whatever help you need. And I don't have any experience kind of in film production, nothing at all. And so, that was never my goal, was never to be a producer. But he said, I'm doing a shoot, definitely need some help, come out. And I said, no problem. And I think we always joke the first thing I did for David was get him an SD card from Staples. I texted him before I came, I was like, hey, do you need anything? And he's like, yeah, I actually forgot my SD cards. If you could pick up some SD cards, that would be awesome. And so, yeah, eventually I just got more and more involved. And he's like, you gotta have some kind of title. And so that's how I got the producer title. But yeah, hope that answers the question.
No, it definitely does, and thank you so much, for providing that context. I think we all have different journeys when it comes to surfing, when it comes to the water, our entry into it, or as we were talking earlier, my lack of entry into the scene. Just also growing up in a pseudo-landlocked area where some of those very same restrictions that you featured when it comes to segregation had an impact on what kind of access, folks within cities had to pools, to water, or lack thereof. And so, one of the questions that, I was thinking about as we're watching this film is also, this is one of the few that we see where race is so prominent in the discussion, but also, why don't we discuss race when it comes to surfing that often? And, whether it's within the scene itself, whether it's, even larger, but how does talking about race alongside surfing also reveal these sort of intricacies when it comes to connections to water, connections to history, and especially Black and also American history?
Good question.
You want to take it?
There's a lot of questions there.
It's a lot of questions. So, actually, I did forget to acknowledge my wife who's sitting over there with my daughter, so I want to acknowledge him. I always forget. It's important to acknowledge my family. So race, it's a hard thing to talk about. I felt like America opened up for a bit post Black Lives Matter. I took that opportunity to deal with the race, with the issues that I felt with. As a Black man, having a child, and seeing people being killed, and your son, I do get emotional, and I apologize. Your son asking you, why are they killing us? How do you answer that? Exactly, it's a hard one. So, being an Ethiopian, I can understand, I can put context to what was happening to me, the experience that I went through, but it was difficult to answer that question to him. In many ways, it's a tribute to him and to that question. It's a personal journey, but I think, it was an issue of race and also an issue of what my other brothers and sisters were feeling. And I go back to that healing. The ocean is a healing. Has such a powerful healing power. that I wanted to see if everyone else felt the same way that I felt. So I asked the same question to everyone, and a lot of it is not captured in the documentary, but I asked them similar questions. And the race issue varied, right? Some people took it as they did, as I did, and some people didn't take it the same way. They were a lot more stronger than I was, a lot more acknowledging of the past and dealing with it in a completely different way. That way, that's the reason why there's a different narrative from everyone's experience of wade in the water. And it was important to tell these stories not the same way that I felt, but it was important to me that I captured it through different lenses. That's why you go through the journey of wade in the water. I touch your heart, and then I touch your brain with the fact, and I go back and touch your heart, is to take you on that journey. That's how I dealt with race, at least from my experience.
I'll leave that question at that.
Definitely, and I think I appreciate you bringing up that moment because, you know, it makes me wonder also, since you began filming, you know, post George Floyd, post sort of this, you know, moment where a lot of folks are starting to recognize and also see us, you know, in a different sort of way, see us as in Black folks out there. And, you know, in some ways we became more hyper-visible. We also were rendered invisible, and in some cases, you know, there's this push or feeling that I think some folks have, my students included, where they're becoming invisible once again. Those issues no longer take prominence. It's as though we had the moment, and then, you know, everyone's kind of pulling back a little bit. How do you think the work that you folks are doing with this documentary is conversing with that moment and conversing with this sort of pull and tug, you know, that the country has, and I would say even the globe has, when it concerns Black lives?
I can talk about that. So I would say, as far as surfing and kind of Black people that surf and the population kind of dynamics over time, I think there's been a massive increase in the number of kind of African and African American surfers. And there's actually a study that we saw recently that you know, surfing is growing as a sport, like internationally, but Black people are actually leading the way as far as the growth markers for that specific population. And so I think between the years 2019 and 2021 or something like that, the population of Black surfers actually has doubled. And so that's a huge, huge number. And I don't think that's really something that you can just change some media and like kind of reverse that whole effect. Because as a lot of people know, kind of when surfing kind of takes a hold of your life, or you know, you're really drawn to it, it's not something that you can, it's kind of you open Pandora's box, there's no really closing it. And so I think the wave, no pun intended, of like the Black surfers that are coming through it's already kind of really over a threshold. The snowball's kind of rolling down the mountain, I feel like, and it's reaching a speed that there's nothing to kind of do, nothing anyone can do, I don't think, that can kind of stop that progress. From our perspective, I think that the success of this project, we've been really kind of floored to you know, be here in Hawaii, to screen in different countries, different cities. It's really amazing, so I think that's been a huge marker for us, but I'm seeing a lot of new projects that are coming out, a lot of new groups, a lot of new communities, and so I have a lot of hope, and I have no doubt that, you know, this whole movement will be really strong kind of going into the future, and so I'm not really too kind of worried about that at all, but I definitely do recognize in, you know, broader society, especially in America, there's definitely kind of a weird cadence of that conversation, but I don't think that surfing kind of mirrors that, in my perspective. Yeah, David, I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, you know, that varies, right? So that, at least from my experience, the impact what this film is having is what Beyin talked about, the growth. The objective of this project has always been to inspire the next generation of Black surfers, and I look at it through the lens of what's happening after I watch this after people watch this documentary, and the youth going out in the water, the number of kids that I see out there. So it is having its impact. So it's nice to see that. I don't know if that's answering your question, but it's also the welcoming of different film festivals and nations wanting to see this film, from Portugal to Australia to South Africa, back to Hawaii and Canada. So the openness of people wanting to hear and learn more about the project, because the teaser is very much, I don't know if you had a chance to watch, I should say the trailer, it only touches a small part of what you saw. And I did that on purpose, I wanted to deal with something that's more of a hook. And if you're open with your mind and you want to learn a little bit more, you're willing to come to a film festival and watch it. And there are certain people that would watch the trailer and have a completely different perspective of the film, which was quite interesting. So I would get, messages on Instagram. And if you haven't seen the documentary in context of everything that we put into it, it was quite interesting how people reacted to it. So, yeah.
And I just want to add, kind of as he was talking, I kind of brought up some new thoughts of, even just the short video that we watched before our kind of documentary. There's the kind of film about Mikey February and his dad. I think Mikey February is another great example of someone who's had a massive kind of impact when it comes to diversity in surfing. He's really the face of Vans surfing, Vans marketing. And Vans spends like massive budgets. The baby agrees. Vans spends massive budgets to kind of market Mikey February. That exposure is also going to have a massive effect. And I think that has been a huge driver for those increasing in those numbers. Also, another like local Hawaiian kind of surfer, Connie Stewart, Connie Tsunami on Instagram. He's world-class longboarder, arguably the best of all time, you could say. And he's had a huge impact. Same thing with Dominique Miller, Nika Miller on Instagram. Maybe she's also had a massive impact. I know so many people that kind of look up to her, and that she's just been so inspirational. Same with Connie, same with Mikey February especially. And so Mikey February is, even a lot of the pro surfers, look up to Mikey February. And so I think those three folks and folks like them have also had a massive impact, which you can't really erase. Like, you can't erase the past 5 years of Vans marketing or the past 3 years of WSL longboard contests or things like that. And so I think that's also a huge impact.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that your documentary helps reveal is not only how diverse surfing has always been in a certain way, but then also it's revealing the legacy of that connection between people and water. One that, dare we even say it sometimes, often we're disconnected from, whether by policies, whether very intentionally. And I really appreciated the way that you folks were interweaving these different aspects of history, into it to help tell this story. And so, actually, do we have any questions for the audience just yet? Are y'all just kind of enjoying the conversation? We're good. Let's go to the audience and then we'll come back to, some more of the questions. You want to go?
Where else is this film available to be seen? Because I was trying to get my African-American neighbor and his Caucasian wife to come with their biracial kid, and he was just putting his feet down. I'm like, no, you've got to see this film. Where is it available?
It's only at film festivals. Currently, we just signed up with Mojo Films, so they're trying to find an online platform right now, a streaming platform. So follow us on Instagram. It's under my name, David Mesfin Art, and I'll always update people when it's going to be available. Yeah? All right.
Or the website,
WaitingTheWaterProject.com. You can go there too and sign up for an email if you prefer email. We're constantly updating people. Yeah, thank you.
Good deal. Other questions for the audience? Still left? Yes.
Was there any aspect of the history that you found out that you learned along the way that really interested you?
Just really quickly,
Yeah, sure.
I'm going to answer the question, but can we give a round of applause for Brennan? He's actually hosting me all my time here in Hawaii.
Oh.
Thank you so much.
So the Underground Railroad, that part of the story, I didn't know the meaning of it. I just, I learned about it through Professor Kevin Dawson, what it meant in that moment of that individual going underwater, and it was more of a laughter, and it was like, oh, you went under the Underground Railroad. I've always imagined the Underground Railroad was like physical railroad where you escape from, from south to north. But also there's a lot that's not in this documentary, just the same way as the Underground Railroad, going back to that, going from, Harriet Tubman escaping from south to north. St. Augustine, of all places where I lived, what was interesting was there's a place called Fort Mose. And Fort Mose was the first place where Africans were free, actually, in St. Augustine. and they escaped from up north, Georgia, South Carolina, and actually went south, and they used boats and surfboards to escape. A lot of this history, you have to really dig deep. What I also found interesting about America and the education was, you know, I lived in St. Augustine. I didn't know a lot of this story. You know, you lived in St. Augustine, and the history about the 1964, you know, act, you know, the civil act passing due to what back then was called wading, which is the protest of standing in the water in a pool. That's why you saw the bleach being thrown in the pool. That was not taught to me where I lived in St. Augustine. I didn't know the history that Ponce de Leon, who was a Spanish and discovered St. Augustine, Florida, his navigator was a black man. That was not taught to me. I didn't know about Fort Mose. I discovered all these things as I left St. Augustine to move to California to live, and realizing all this, like how much of Black history is not being taught, how much of it is being taken away right now in Florida, right? So it was important to tell these stories as I discovered them in a narrative where it's palatable, you know, by touching your heart and your brain through the narrative.
Yeah, and just like my experience coming to the shoots and like interviewing someone like Kevin Dawson, like every sentence he said, my mind was just kind of exploding. I was like, there's no way, what is going on? All the divers and the, you know, the aquatic history is insane. And then Allison Rose Jefferson, the same thing with kind of Jim Crow era in California. And so there's all kinds of stuff that, for me personally, I learned so much just being at the shoots themselves. But yeah, we still learn so much, and we send each other kind of articles all the time with new kind of information. We're just like, how does no one know this? How do we not even know this? We're like specialized in this topic now. And so yeah, there's a lot, but yeah, we're trying to, you know, do our part to kind of expose it to the masses. So hopefully we can.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes.
Are there any parts of the story that maybe like you learned after the fact or weren't able to include in the film for one reason or another that you wish you could?
Yes. So, you know, trying to figure out the history of aquatic culture in Africa, right? So a lot of it, as you saw, is through the lens, the European lens, you know, Michael Emerson, 1640, seeing, you know, a mother teaching her daughter or kid how to surf and so forth. But if you go far back, the Arabs actually had libraries before Europe, right? So there's a lot of history there that we don't know about. Mansa Musa, who was the richest man in Africa with gold, prior to him, there was a king that actually navigated. The belief is that he tried to navigate to West. They didn't know America existed, right? So, or America was even a nation. To discover that, right, that Africans were navigating prior to the Portuguese. Of course, the Portuguese pick up on Arabs, how they built the boats and so forth. So these are new things that I'm finally making connection, the dots, you know, by going past 1640, the 1,000-year-old canoe that was discovered in Africa and so forth. So these are the things I'm discovering. And it's so fascinating, you know. It's like I'm ready to do wade in the water too. So that's one of those stories that I've discovered that I'm just fascinated about.
Yeah, and I think like one saying is kind of, I think it's like art is never finished, it's only abandoned. And I think, you know, we were really sad to have a picture lock and we can't really do any big changes. And we still have an opportunity to do small changes, but you know, there's always ways to improve and increase the watchability and the entertainment value and the educational value. But you know, you have to kind of be practical and kind of move on. And you know, hopefully we can do wade in the water too and tell more of those stories. But that's a great question.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes, in the middle.
Hi, I'm going to give a compliment. So I'm Jude. David, we had a chance to meet a few times through Color of the Water surf sessions in LA.
That's how you ended up nailing the answer.
Yeah, you cheated on the question.
You cheated on the question because you're hanging out with Colorado.
Well, I'm really grateful to be here today, and that's because a few days ago, I was surfing in Waikiki and I saw a friendly face, Beyin. And I really appreciate how you highlight Color of the Water, Ebony Beach Club, Softly, all these great communities. And I just think for me, the power and what is happening now is that it allows Black folks and folks of color, identify as Filipino. It allows us who are new, and I'm new to surfing, to not be alone, and that we have a community, and that from LA to here, I see someone that I know, and can be at this event today. And so I just think that's the power. For me, I think just having this experience and being part of these communities, the power is that we can go to the ocean not alone and confident, but also with community, and even if we're not planning to be in community when we weren't expecting it. And so just thank you so much again for this great work and highlighting all the beautiful people that you're able to highlight in the documentary.
Yeah. No, thank you. It's amazing what Mother Ocean does, brings us all together. So it's very powerful. The other thing about the narrative of Wade in the Water is it really goes back to West Africa. There's a symbolism in West Africa called Adinkira. It's different symbols, and they all have different meanings. And one of them is called Sankofa. Sankofa, if you look at the sculpture or painting of Sankofa, it's a bird that's looking backwards with the seed in the back, and the meaning behind it is that you have to look into your past to move forward. So in many ways, the philosophy of Wade in the Water is very much that. That's why you see the stories of the past, the legendary surfers as Button and Tony Corley and so forth. And then looking forward is what you just talked about, these younger communities of surfers, Color of the Water, Ebony Beach Club, Soulfly, and so forth, coming together and sort of taking that seed and moving forward. So there's that balance between the past, respecting the past and then moving forward. And it's very much part of, I want to say, Hawaiian culture, Ohana, and so, yeah.
Yeah. So I just wanted to add, thank you for coming, Jude. And it was really awesome I didn't even think about the story in that way, but being in a whole different kind of place, all the way across the Pacific Ocean, in a legendary surf break like Queens. It wasn't breaking crazy like Queens, but it was really cool my first time paddling out to see you, and that's really crazy, I think. And then for you to be able to come to the screening is really awesome. So thank you for kind of bringing that up, and thank you for coming. And then also we met another Filipino
Yes.
Phil. He was also at Queens, and I told him, if you're interested on Sunday, come out, and he came out. So thank you guys both for coming out.
The ocean's connecting folks, right? And I think that's one of the highlights of your film is you're really highlighting the way oceanic connections run. So parallel between different communities, but also have fostered the way communities can grow, can build, can organize, can mobilize, and so much more. And I think showing those different moments in history as well as the contemporary really help highlight that so much. And I just appreciate a lot of work that you folks have been doing with that. So just to kind of turn away from the audience, I'm just really curious, as you look back on the film, as you look back on this process, what were some of the challenges that you folks faced, filming this, bringing this story together, telling this narrative, and what are some things that you hope to include for a future sort of feature?
Yeah, so one of the biggest challenges for Wade in the Water was I basically self-funded this thing. I wanted no other entity to tell me what the narrative would be. So it was important that I told it authentically as I saw it, or as people related to me. That was very important to me. The challenge, of course, comes, a lot of the images did not exist as I learned the stories from Kevin Dawson and so forth. So you couldn't have just a person on camera talking. So figuring out how do I communicate these stories, and the solution was to come up with more of a impressionistic sort of approach of art and drawing all that out. So I was able to pay one artist to do 3 pieces of art, and that wasn't enough. So I basically had to do a lot of the illustrations that you see in there, took time to basically develop. It's like the cut is happening, and we'll do a cut, and I'll do an illustration, and then I'll cut that part of the narrative out, and that illustration has to be thrown, and then go back to drawing a new piece of art. That took a long time. Clearing historical archival footage, doing that on our own. It's literally, 2 people working on this, Beyin and not going back and forth with an editor. So the archival footage, like for example, Buttons, footage, as you saw, it's very pixelated. We pulled that from YouTube until we had the blessing from the family and the person that owns the original footage, which I want to credit him, Gary. He finally, not finally, after I reached out to him, he gave us access to the original footage, so next time you see this documentary, it will be crisper and better. So it takes time. Those are the challenges, in my opinion. Like, it was easy to go out and film all the surfing, to sit down and do the narrative, and then when you sit down and start putting the story together, it becomes challenging when you don't want to just have a person on camera talking. So editorially, that I would say it was the most difficult part. And the last thing was, how do you tell the story? Like, how do you narrate a story about the origin, the future, the spiritual, the challenge? And I give credit to my editor who basically came up with the chaptering approach of, origin, challenge, spirituality, future. And when he came up with that, it allowed us to really chunk, the different stories in there and build a narrative. That took a while to get there.
Yeah, and just quickly to add to that, I think, the main thing is we're not traditional, super experienced filmmakers without any budget at all. And so, we have obviously some budget to, he definitely invested a bunch of money into the project for equipment and things like that. But just figuring out the ropes of how to actually make a full feature documentary when you have no experience at all. And so that was definitely a huge challenge, but our kind of dedication, commitment to the concept and the community would really kind of push us forward, and a lot of the support of the community as well. And then just the storyline and just kind of trying to condense all such heavy topics, such complex, nuanced topics into 1 hour film was very, very difficult. But I would say even before that, trying to make the trailer to kind of tease that was, I think, a really, really, really difficult moment. And then I would say the third thing has just been trying to find some distribution. A lot of people, they ask us, you guys are, all these film festivals, you guys are putting on all these events, so much exposure, like, when is it going to be on Netflix or this or that? And we'd hope, that something like that would work out much quicker than kind of things are working out. But that's been definitely a big challenge, trying to break through that industrial kind of wall and trying to, just get our project to live somewhere so, your friends can watch it. And, so many people are so interested in watching it, but that's definitely been a massive challenge. So definitely making some progress towards that direction, but I would say for sure those have been the big challenges that I've seen in the project for sure.
And so many more people need to hear the story, and not only the way it's connecting, a lot of the ways Black life and surfing integrate, but then also how is that connecting to so many other communities that are in similar predicaments as well. Other questions from the audience?
Oh, you have a question?
There's obviously a very well-known film that goes really well with this that you might want to tell people about.
Which one? Endless Summer?
Whitewash.
Whitewash.
So Whitewash is a similar documentary. If you're interested in the subject matter, definitely check it out. Kelly's in that one. He talks about the Black experience. It's quite different in terms of narrative than what we created, and I would say that is the first probably Black surfing documentary. I don't remember the year, 2019, 2018? Yeah, it was out. And this is the second Black documentary about surfing. So there's a few other ones, they're shorts, but that one I would say is the first one. I would highly recommend it if you're interested in the subject matter. And thank you for bringing it up.
Okay, and the second thing would be, when are you going to do the one on the skiing slopes?
I don't ski, but
We have a friend, Dino, he's big into skiing.
Dino can do that
Maybe we
one,
could
but
push
I'm
it.
sure there's some interesting stories there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It sounds like there's multiple projects that can be
I know.
from here on, right? And then lastly, I just want to close on one last question, And maybe this is in one sense related to what you're showing us with the documentary, but then also your personal connections. How would you describe Black joy and hope as it's tied to water?
Yeah, I can start with that. I think Black people have a specific, I don't know, it's a sticky topic, so I'm gonna have to be very careful. But I think Black people have, you know, a culture that's unique and different from a lot of other people. And I think, you know, that we've seen that outside of surfing, you know, things like hip hop, things like basketball, things like sports, all kinds of other activities, you know. But I think that same essence that, you know, you can clearly see in people like Mikey February or Josiah Faulkner, the other South African kind of pro surfer, or a lot of Black people, you know, kind of have a different way that they do things, and I think it's very unique. And I think that is definitely kind of a different thing that they bring, or we bring kind of to the water space. And I think even outside of the water, things like Ebony Beach Club, you know, I don't think we've ever seen in the history of surfing like a beach party with free surf lessons and, you know, Black music on the beach, like outside of El Camino, someone DJing at the back of it. That's something really, really cool, and I think that's something maybe only the Black community could really spawn, you know? And so I think things like that are really cool. Yeah, so I think, you know, Black people have a unique kind of perspective, African people have a unique perspective and experience, and I think the world is very open to that, given, you know, the success that Black people and African people that we've had in kind of things like music and arts and sports. And so I think Mikey February is a great example of, you know, when that mixes with surfing, as well as Brick and Ebony Beach Club, I think is another great example of that. But yeah, I think those are great examples of kind of Black joy. I think it's a little bit more loud than the average kind of joy. I think it's a little bit more expressive. I think it's, you know, it has a little bit different of sauce. You know, it has a different kind of flavor. And so, yeah, exactly. So I think that's really cool. I think Kanye Stewart, you can see a lot of that. You know, I think, and it's not always the same. I'm not, you know, Black people are not monolithic. I think that's a huge thing that we kind of try to show through the documentary. But I do think there's a through line that, you know, does kind of unite a lot of Black folks. And so I think that's what I would say is kind of Black joy from my perspective.
It's a vibe.
It's a vibe.
Yeah, it's a vibe.
I'll try to keep it short. I think Black joy to me is, you know, self-respect, you know, it's respecting your cultures, respecting other cultures. It's passing on this legacy, this idea of Sankofa, of respecting the past and moving it on to the next generation and so forth. So to me, that is Black joy. That is weight in the water, is passing on this history and really to inspire the next generation of Black surfers. That's joy to me.
So, any last questions from the audience? Oh, no, we still have one more. There we go.
So that poem in the end of the movie,
Yes.
what is the story behind that?
That's a really good story. So, my wife is a poet. So when I met her, you know, she would write all kinds of poems. So I was always inspired by her poetry, and poetry became part of sort of like another lens, another medium. So when I did the documentary, there were 3 parts of the poem. The first part was, you know, the connection to Mother Ocean, to Mami Wata, and what that meant to me as a surfer, and the experiences that you have as a surfer. That one in particular was about how do you connect to Mami Wata, and to me was when you duck dive, I feel like you lose your consciousness for a few seconds. That is the moment I feel like you connect with Mami Wata. So that was the concept behind the opening title treatment per se. In the middle, you have the poem, right, from a surfer who basically wrote it 6 days before he died, which was very powerful to me. And I thought it was important that's in there. And then to your question, the last poem was very much, how do we end this documentary? If the objective is to inspire the next generation of Black surfer, how do I want to end it? And it really came at the tail end. We met a famous poet who had won the Grammy. The music house actually offered it up. They said, you know, he's available if you want to write a poem with him. And I said, okay. If this is, a Grammy-winning poet, where do we start? And I basically wrote it down on paper and said, I want to end with inspiring the next generation of Black surfers, and I'll put a couple points in there. It was a really high-level concept, and at the time, my wife and I had traveled to Ethiopia. There's a lot of improvisation. So the footage that you saw, the slow motion footage, was shot on what's called a phantom camera, and I really didn't know what to do with it, because you can't put it in the middle. There's a few times that you see the slow motion. It's really, really slow motion, and I felt that a poem that is written about inspiring Black surfers and the slow motion movement, like visually, would be quite interesting. So I cut that last part on the way to Ethiopia, where we were in Ethiopia. He wrote the poem, he sent it to me. I took that poem and dropped it on the footage, and it fit exactly. It was meant to be. That's how it came to be.
Wow, nice.
It's quite amazing. I keep watching it. We wanted to go back and we finesse it a little bit. There's a couple moments where like the surfer just takes a long time to do that 360 turn, but I'm like afraid to touch it. We have one more moment to like make some minor changes, like putting your dad's footage back in there so it's clear. But that's one part of the documentary I can't really touch. So that's how it came to be.
Thank you.
Seiko is the poet, by the way. Seiko, yeah, if you look him up.
Yeah, and just to add quickly, like when people talk about that poem, I like to highlight the fact that, yeah, the poet that wrote it is a Grammy-winning kind of poet. This is a world-class poet, and we're just independent filmmakers, and he did it for us for free. And so that's a huge, huge thing. And then number two is like the camera is, I think those photographers are the same photographers that shoot for Kelly Slater.
Yes, he shoots for Kelly.
And that camera is worth like hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so they just told us, hey, we love the project, we'd love to come and shoot, And so we had a big shoot day, we invited them, and they gave us the footage. It was like many, many gigabytes of data. And so they gave it to us for free. They don't have to do that. Their day rate is probably, crazy, but it's probably half the budget that we spent on the film itself. And so just examples of great community support that we've received from especially very talented kind of creative people that, it's not like we did all of this by ourselves. It's like a whole kind of huge roster of people that really, really helped us. The opening title sequence, I think, is a great kind of thing as well. It's like so powerful, that the animation. And David definitely owned that, and he kind of worked on the creative with the animation house. And when I saw it, I was just so amazed. That kind of water deep, blowing that surfer, and turning around and like going away. I was just like, wow, that's amazing. And we actually won awards for that animation sequence, and people write kind of articles about it. And again, a whole animation house, like 9-10 people worked on that for like a month or something like that. And they did it all for free. And so and they even worked on some PR for us. And so that's another example of the kind of the community support. So I just like to highlight that. And it's not just David and I doing it by ourselves. Like we barely know what we're doing.
That's why there's a long credit.
Yeah. So yeah, just like to add that kind of a nice way to end up the Q&A. But yeah, thank you, Mario. And thank you guys all for kind of being here. I didn't say that officially, so thank you so much, and it really means a lot to us. It's a crazy moment for me to kind of be here, like in your guys' presence, in Hawaii, screening the documentary. It's really amazing, so thank you guys.
Another round of applause to Buttons family.
Thank you everybody once again for coming out and staying around for the conversation. Thank you both, David and Beyin, for bringing this here and really having this enlightening conversation and making these connections and just really looking forward to not only what you folks come up with next, but also when we're able to see it, in our own homes or our devices and everything else. And so really looking forward to the future, and just also thank you so much for making a piece that is motivating. Motivating to not only get folks to get into the water, to reconnect, but really to also hear us, see us, and understand that history. So thank you so much.
Thank you for hosting it. Thank you to the whole museum. Thank you everyone that came out. Really big day for us. So thank you so much.
that'd be my family. They're in the back.
I want to say, I really like, if you think it well, it's just, it goes to.
Yeah, let me get your contact there. I want to be connected.
It's a connection.
I usually do Instagram.
This was mine, it was really dummy.
Yeah, we're going to take a few.
Well, I thought you needed to work with her.
Hi. Nice meeting you. Yeah, let's all take a picture.
Yeah, bro, these are always Moana's money.
I was born.